Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Amendment 2. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Amendment 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house, without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Amendment 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched, and the persons or things to be seized. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces, or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Amendment 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Amendment 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Amendment 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people.
Well, welcome to another edition of Traveling Through History. As you can see from the lead-in there, tonight we're going to talk about the U.S. Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights being a very important topic for us to come back to, because several weeks ago we actually covered the U.S. Constitution and the history behind it. And if you watched that episode, you will know, but if you didn't, you should go check it out. We talk a lot about the 6 months that were spent in Philadelphia in the Constitutional Convention, the debating that happened between all the states and all the founding fathers who were there doing the debating and coming up with this Constitution, led by James Madison and others. And one of the big points of contention in that convention were by Anti-Federalists like George Mason and several others, who wanted to have a Bill of Rights included in the Constitution before they would sign off on it, before they would agree to it. Well, over their objections, the Federalists did approve the Constitution the way it was without a Bill of Rights. very much to the objection of the Anti-Federalists, and the document went to the Congress and to the states to be ratified. Many of the states who had a real problem with this, of course, had very robust debates back in their states. The debates actually went on for several years, and some of the deals that were cut in back rooms around the Bill of Rights allowed the Constitution as written at the time to be ratified by the states, including places like Virginia and Massachusetts, where promises were made, especially by James Madison, that they would, in fact, after the Constitution was passed, come back, draft a Bill of Rights to protect individual freedoms against a tyrannical government, and go introduce those Bill of Rights to Congress for passage. And so felt it very important tonight on Traveling Through History to come back to this topic and finish it off, since we did the U.S. Constitution episode. This is to tack on to that topic. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Bill of Rights, the history of them, how they came about. They really started with 19 amendments that were proposed by James Madison to Congress. And then we'll talk about how they got whittled down to the 10 that eventually got passed and ratified by the states. We'll look at a short video, and then we'll also talk about, as always in the program, 25 interesting facts about the Bill of Rights themselves. So let's go ahead and talk about the Bill of Rights and their history. The United States Bill of Rights comprises the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, proposed following the often bitter 1787 to 1788 debate over ratification of the Constitution, and written to address the objections raised by Anti-Federalists. The Bill of Rights amendments add the Constitution specific guarantees of personal freedoms and rights, clear limitations on government's power in judicial and other proceedings, and explicit declarations of all powers not specifically granted to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the states and to the people. And you heard that in the lead-in about the reservation of powers not enumerated in the Constitution to be left with the people. And this really was a radical idea at the time, to round out this concept of a government by the people, for the people. You wanted to have a very limited government that focused on only a couple of very important things, and then left the rest of the power to the people and to the states. The concept codified in these amendments are built upon those in earlier documents, such as the Virginia Declaration of Rights in 1776, and also the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the English Bill of Rights that came in 1689, almost 100 years earlier, and then almost 500 years earlier, the Magna Carta. And we'll talk a little bit about the English Bill of Rights and Magna Carta, how they were really a model for this document, along with the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Largely because of the efforts of Representative James Madison, who studied the deficiencies of the Constitution pointed out by Anti-Federalists and then crafted a series of corrective proposals. Congress approved 12 articles of amendment on September 25th, 1789. This was 2 years after the Constitution was drafted. They submitted them to the states for ratification, contrary to Madison's proposal that the proposed amendments be incorporated into the main body of the Constitution. They were proposed as supplemental additions to it, or amendments. Articles 3 through 12 were ratified as additions to the Constitution on December 15, 1791, and became amendments 1 through 10 of the Constitution. Article 2 became part of the Constitution on May 5, 1992, as the 27th Amendment. Article 1 is still pending before the states. Although Madison's proposed amendments included a provision to extend the protection of some of the Bill of Rights to the states, the amendments that were finally submitted for ratification only applied to the federal government. The door for their application upon state governments was opened in the 1860s, following ratification of the 14th Amendment. Since the early 20th century, both federal and state courts have raised the 14th Amendment to supply portions of the Bill of Rights to state and local governments. The process is known as incorporation of the states. There are several original engrossed copies of the Bill of Rights still in existence today. One of those is on permanent display at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. If you haven't gone to the archives in D.C., it is a great trip. There's a lot of great documents there. Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and of course, this original Bill of Rights that was sent out to the states. In terms of some of the background behind this, During the Philadelphia Convention, prior to ratification and implementation of the U.S. Constitution, the 13 sovereign states followed the Articles of Confederation created by the Second Continental Congress and ratified in 1781. However, the national government that operated under the Articles of Confederation was too weak to adequately regulate the various conflicts that arose between the states. The Philadelphia Convention set out to correct weaknesses in those articles that had been apparent even before the American Revolutionary War had been successfully concluded. The convention took place from May 14th to September 17th, 1787, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Constitution Hall. Although the convention was purportedly intended to revise the articles, the intention of many of its proponents, chief among them James Madison of Virginia and Alexander Hamilton of New York, was to create a new government rather than fix the existing one. The convention convened in the Pennsylvania State House, and George Washington of Virginia was unanimously selected as the president of the convention. The 55 delegates who drafted the Constitution are among the men known as founding fathers of the new nation. Thomas Jefferson, who was minister to France during the convention, characterized the delegates as an assembly of demigods. Rhode Island refused to send delegates to the convention. They were the only states not in attendance. On September 12th, George Mason of Virginia suggested the addition of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, modeled on previous state declarations, and Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts made a formal motion to amend the Constitution with these Bill of Rights. However, after only a brief discussion where Roger Sherman pointed out the state's Bill of Rights were not repealed by the new Constitution, the motion was defeated by unanimous vote of the state delegations. Madison, then an opponent of the Bill of Rights, later explained the vote by calling the state Bills of Rights parchment barriers that offered only an illusion of protection against tyranny. Another delegate, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, later argued that the act of enumerating rights of the people would have been dangerous because it would imply that rights not explicitly mentioned did not exist. Hamilton echoed the point in his Federalist number 84 paper. Because Mason and Gerry had emerged as opponents of the proposed new Constitution, their motion, introduced 5 days before the end of the convention, may also have been seen by other delegates as a delaying tactic. The quick rejection of the motion, however, later endangered the entire ratification process of the Constitution itself. Author David O. Stewart characterizes the omission of a Bill of Rights in the original Constitution as a political blunder of the first magnitude, while historian Jack Rekov calls it the one serious miscalculation the framers made as they looked ahead to the struggle over ratification of the Constitution. 39 delegates signed the finalized Constitution. 13 delegates left before it was completed, and 3 who remained at the convention until the end refused to sign it. It was George Mason, Gerry, as we mentioned, and Edmund Randolph of Virginia. Afterwards, the Constitution was presented to the Articles of Confederation Congress with the request that it afterwards be submitted to the Convention of Delegates, chosen in each state by the people for their assent and ratification. Following the Philadelphia Convention, some leading revolutionary figures such as Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, Richard Henry Lee publicly opposed the new frame of the government, a position known as Anti-Federalism. Elbridge Gerry wrote the most popular Anti-Federalist tract, which went through 46 printings. The essay particularly focused on the lack of a Bill of Rights in the proposed Constitution. Many were concerned that the strong national government was a threat to individual rights and that the president would become a king. Jefferson wrote to Madison advocating a Bill of Rights. Half a loaf is better than no bread. If we cannot secure all of our rights, let us secure what we can. So you can see at the time that the Constitution was going along and going through ratification process, there was a lot of debate back and forth. It almost didn't get through. It did end up getting 9 of the 13 states to approve, which is all they needed. But the individuals like James Madison, who opposed it at the time, while the ratification process was going on, came to realize the importance of the United States Bill of Rights, that these amendments were incredibly important to add to the Constitution to round it out. and to protect those individual rights and those individuals in states from federal government tyranny and overreach. And so he actually ended up following through, James Madison, by writing the Bill of Rights, 19 of them originally. And then, of course, as we'll talk about here in a little bit, 12 of them got approved by the Congress, and then only 10 of them got approved by the states and went into law and were appended to the Constitution. So that's a little bit about the Bill of Rights and how they got appended to the Constitution, became law, and became our first 10 amendments that were designed to protect our individual freedoms and designed to protect us from our own government, which there was a lot of suspicion after getting our freedom from England that we might create a government that was just as bad. So let's go ahead and take a look at a short video, and we'll come back and talk about it on the other side.
The right to stand up for what we believe in is as American as apple pie, Independence Day, and Route 66. That right and others is protected under U.S. law by the Bill of Rights, a list of 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution that almost never existed. In 1787, the Founding Fathers met in Philadelphia to draft the U.S. Constitution. It took almost 4 months of intense debate to get something down on paper. And that's when things got really tense. The Federalists wanted to ratify the Constitution because they believed it did a great job of establishing the roles and responsibilities of government. But the Anti-Federalists didn't want to ratify the Constitution unless it included written guarantees to protect the rights of people and limit the power of government. Calling time out, Virginian Anti-Federalist George Mason put forward a compromise. What if the Constitution was amended to include a list of civil rights that the government could not restrict? What a good idea! With the deadlock broken, the Constitution was signed into law, and Federalist James Madison got to work drawing up the list of the amendments. Representatives from different states bombarded him with ideas. He ignored some, but included others, rights and freedoms that many Americans know and love today, like freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and the right to bear arms. In the end, 10 amendments were made to the Constitution. They're known as the Bill of Rights. So, why does it matter? Today, the civil liberties set out in the Bill of Rights protect your way of life. They're the bedrock of what it is to be American. But the Bill of Rights is also controversial, the source of countless arguments as Americans still disagree over where the government's control ends and their rights begin. Without the Bill of Rights, how do you think the U.S. would be different today?
So as you can see from the video, there was quite a chance that the Bill of Rights was never going to be appended to the Constitution even after it was ratified. It was really quite a thing that several of the Federalists, like James Madison and others, really came to their senses during those 2 years of ratification process, that they started to realize the Bill of Rights was, in fact, actually very necessary to be enumerated, to be spelled out, and to protect individual freedoms, and to make sure the country was whole and the vision that we were intending from the very beginning. And so it was kind of touch and go there for a while. And even today, as the video suggests, there's still much debate over the Constitution itself, and there's much debate over each of the 10 amendments. And really, all 27 total amendments are also under debate on a regular basis. Several of the most important amendments in the Bill of Rights, of course, are debated all the time. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, always seems to be under attack. And it was put first for a reason. It really was considered by the founders to be the most important in a democracy, in a republic, in a free country where you could say whatever you want without reprisals and without being thrown into jail or being tortured or having any kind of reciprocity against you. The Second Amendment was put second also for a very important reason, because the individuals who started this country and were the founders really looked at government tyranny as one of the real things you needed to guard against, and wanted to make sure that individuals not only could protect themselves, protect their families and their property, but also protect their way of life against a government that could maybe in the future overreach. And of course, we've seen some of that. One of the reasons our government doesn't try to overreach against our people is because our people are very well armed around the country. Other amendments really important there, many of them are around our legal rights, right to jury trial, right to prevent searches and seizures without a warrant, our right to have an attorney, right to life, limb, and property. And as you saw there, the 9th and 10th Amendment were all about anything not enumerated in the Constitution itself was left to the states, and anything not in a state constitution was then left to the people. Also, the Bill of Rights was incredibly important because it codified and solidified the idea of a government for the people, by the people, and it solidified the idea that our rights are given to us by our higher power and not by our government. And so it protects our government from taking away those rights that are inherent in our being and inherent to us as Americans. So very, very important there to consider. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 25 interesting facts about the Bill of Rights. Number one, the Bill of Rights owes a lot to the Magna Carta. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier in the program. The Magna Carta was one of the major models for the Bill of Rights itself. And you can see a picture there on the top left of the Magna Carta and the seal at that time from King John in 1215 AD. Some of the sentiments in our Bill of Rights are at least 800 years old. In 1215, King John of England had serious uprising on his hands. For many years, discontentment festered among his barons, many of whom loathed the king and his sky-high taxes. On May 17th, a rebellious faction led by Robert Fitzwalter captured London, forcing John to negotiate. Their talks produced one of the most significant legal documents ever written. The king and his barons composed a 63-clause agreement, which would ostensibly impose certain limits on royal rule. Among these laws, the best known gave English noblemen the right to a fair trial. They called their groundbreaking peace treaty the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. It's really interesting that this was really the first type of document like this that was really focused on individual rights and imposing restrictions on the government itself. Another big influence to the Bill of Rights was the English Bill of Rights, which was issued in 1689. This parliamentary act made several guarantees that were later echoed by the first 10 constitutional amendments, which we call our Bill of Rights. For instance, the English Bill of Rights forbids cruel and unusual punishments while ensuring the right of subjects to petition the king. You see some pictures there of the English Bill of Rights and some of the debates that were happening on the top right there at that time. It's really interesting that they built on top of 400 years later the Magna Carta that had been so influential in English culture. Number three, the U.S. Bill of Rights was championed by an oft-ignored founding father, and you saw a little bit about this in the video. There's a decent chance you've never heard of George Mason or don't know much about him, and you see a picture of him there on the right. By founding father standards, the Virginian has been largely overlooked. If it weren't for Mason, the Constitution might never have been given its venerated Bill of Rights. Back in 1776, Mason was part of a committee that drafted the Virginia's Declaration of Rights. All men, the finished product said, are by nature free and independent and have certain inherent rights, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty. Does that sound familiar? It should. As everybody knows, Thomas Jefferson would write another more famous declaration that year in 1776, the Declaration of Independence. When he did so, he was heavily influenced by the document Mason had spearheaded. In 1787, with the Constitutional Convention wrapping up in Philadelphia, Mason argued that a Bill of Inalienable Rights should be added to that Constitution. This idea was flatly rejected by the state delegates. So in protest, Mason refused to sign the completed Constitution. It's really interesting. He was such a driving force behind the Virginia Declaration of Rights, the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson modeled it after, and then, of course, was a big player in the Constitutional Convention and planted the seed for the Bill of Rights, although he didn't win in 1787. Of course, we did get our Bill of Rights finally approved in 1791, 4 years later. Number four, Mason found an ally in Gerry of gerrymandering. At the convention, the motion to include a Bill of Rights wasn't made by Mason, although he seconded it. Instead, credit belongs to one Elbridge Gerry from Massachusetts, who also withheld his signature from the Constitution. He'd go on to become a famous figure. He'd go on to become a notorious figure during his tenure as governor of Massachusetts. A staunch Democratic Republican, Jerry was governor during the blatantly partisan redrawing of the Bay State's congressional districts. These days, we call the political maneuvering gerrymandering. It's really interesting that procedure that many states use today to create favorable districts for their party was named after Elbridge Gerry, who also was an anti-federalist and also a big part of getting us the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Number 5, Thomas Jefferson was a huge proponent of the Bill of Rights. The sage of Monticello sided with Mason from France, where he was working as United States ambassador. So unfortunately, he was not even at the Constitutional Convention, but was writing letters to put in his input. Following the Constitution's approval, Jefferson offered a few comments to his friend James Madison, whom history called its father. "I do not like the omission of the Bill of Rights," he wrote. "Let me add that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth." So you can see the Anti-Federalists, led by Jefferson, by Mason, these were individuals who were very thoughtful. They were founders of the country, and they very much disagreed with omission of the Bill of Rights and wanted it included. And of course, we're a big part of why it eventually did get passed 4 years later. Number 6, so was John Adams. John Adams was away in Great Britain at the time when the Constitution was being created. Upon reading its contents, he proclaimed, "A Declaration of Rights I wish to see with all my heart, though I am sensible of the difficulty in framing one in which all states can agree." He espoused for a Bill of Rights in all his letters for a year while it was being debated back in the States. So you can see all of these guys were writing letters to James Madison and essentially espousing and encouraging a Bill of Rights to be included. Number 7, at first, James Madison thought it was useless and unnecessary to have a Bill of Rights. From the onset, this future president admired the principle behind the Bill of Rights. Still, he initially saw no point in creating one. He believed that the Constitution clearly stated what the government can do and did not need additional provisions on personal freedoms. Madison explained his position to Jefferson in October 1788, writing, "My own opinion has always been in favor of a Bill of Rights. At the same time, I have never thought its omission a material defect." But Madison eventually changed his tune. After becoming a congressman in 1789, he formally introduced the amendments that would comprise the current Bill of Rights after promising them for ratification by the states of the Constitution. So he made a bunch of promises to the states who were looking at ratifying the Constitution that he would bring this bill up in Congress, and he followed through on his promise. Also, many writings at the time said that he had really changed his tune and changed his opinion about the Bill of Rights and came to think that actually it was a very big defect in the original Constitution. And so he became a big advocate and proponent of it being included. Number 8, before he could introduce the Bill of Rights, Madison had to defeat James Monroe. Madison won his seat in the U.S. House of Representatives after running against the man who had become his Oval Office successor. So James Madison was the 4th president and Monroe was the 5th president. Both candidates acted with civility. While on the campaign trail, they regularly dined together, they traveled together, and even shared sleeping quarters together. So can you even imagine in our politics today, these two opponents running for the same seat, living together, dining together, traveling together, probably debating the future of the country together? And Madison, of course, defeated him for that seat and then went on to propose the Bill of Rights. Number 9, Congress passed 12 amendments, but 2 were later excluded. And we mentioned a little bit about this in the lead-in and also in the video. Originally, Representative Madison presented 19 amendments. On August 24th, 1789, the House approved 17 of those 19 amendments. That September, the Senate made some very heavy edits, trimming these down to an even dozen or 12 amendments, which the states then reviewed. In the end, numbers 3 through 12 were approved and collectively became our Bill of Rights on December 15, 1791. So the original Amendment 1 and 2 were not approved, and 3 through 12 were. And so our First Amendment, freedom of speech, was actually the Third Amendment in the original batch. And as you see, there were 19 in the original that Madison sent over. So 9 total were disallowed and 10 total were approved. Number 10, an undergraduate student got one of those axed amendments ratified in 1992. This is a pretty incredible story. This wasn't that long ago. The second proposed amendment would have restricted Congress's ability to give itself a pay raise or a pay cut. Sensible as this idea sounds, the amendment wasn't ratified by the required 3/4 majority of U.S. states. So for 202 years, it was stuck in limbo. Gregory Watson, you see a picture of him down below today, but at the time he was a student at the University of Texas. Watson was researching a term paper when he discovered this congressional pay amendment. As he dug deeper, the undergrad found that it was still technically pending before state legislatures. So Watson mounted an aggressive letter writing campaign. And after a bit of legal wrangling with Congress, on May 20th, 1992, the Constitution was updated to include it as the 27th and most recent amendment. Watson, by the way, got a C on that term paper, which is really hilarious that he got a C on the paper, but he did something very historic, and that is he was the impetus behind the original Second Amendment that got rejected to now be approved as the 27th Amendment. And that is to restrict Congress's ability to give itself a pay raise or a pay cut. Number 11, some of the original copies were destroyed. During his first term, President Washington and Congress had 14 official handwritten replicas of the Bill of Rights made. At present, 2 are conspicuously unaccounted for. 1 copy was retained by the federal government, while the rest were sent off to the 11 states, as well as Rhode Island and North Carolina, which had yet to ratify. Subsequently, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New York, and Georgia all lost theirs somehow. It's believed that the Empire States was burned in the 1911 fire, while Georgia's likely went up in smoke during the Civil War. In 1945, a long-lost original copy, experts aren't sure which one, was gifted to the Library of Congress. 49 years earlier, the New York Public Library had obtained another one. Because it's widely believed that this one originally belonged to Pennsylvania, the document is currently being shared between the Keystone State and the New York Public Library until 2020. Then New York will have it for 60% of the time and Pennsylvania for the rest. So very interesting that 2 states are sharing one of these copies back and forth and display both of them in these different libraries. Number 12, North Carolina's copy may have been stolen by a Civil War soldier. You see a picture of him there on the bottom right, the individual who they believe took this original copy. During the spring of 1865, Raleigh was firmly under the control of pro-Union troops. According to a statement released by the U.S. Attorney's Office in that city, sometime during the occupation, a soldier in General William Sherman's army allegedly took North Carolina's copy of the Bill of Rights from the state capitol and carried it away. Afterward, it changed hands several times and eventually came into the antique dealer Wayne Pratt's possession. When the FBI learned of his plan to sell the priceless parchment, operatives seized it. In 2007, the copy went on a well-publicized tour of North Carolina before returning to Raleigh, hopefully for good. So pretty cool that this document that this soldier stole, and then you can see it changed many hands during the years, eventually did get re-seized by the FBI and is back in Raleigh where it needs to be. Number 13, 3 states didn't ratify the Bill of Rights until 1939. To celebrate the Constitution's 150th anniversary, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Georgia formally gave the Bill of Rights the approval they'd withheld for over a century, to much pomp and circumstance. So what a cool thing here that these 3 states had not actually originally approved the Bill of Rights at the time and went ahead and did the formal process in 1939 to make it all states now ratify the Bill of Rights. You can see flags of the 3 states there, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Georgia. Number 14, the Bill of Rights' least litigated amendment is the Third Amendment. Thanks to this one, soldiers cannot legally be quartered inside your home without your consent. Since colonial Americans had lived in fear of being suddenly forced to house and feed British troops, the amendment was warmly received during the late 1700s. Today, however, it's rarely invoked. As of this writing, the Supreme Court has never based a decision upon it. So the American Bar Association once called this amendment the runt piglet of the Constitution. It literally has never been challenged. And you can see the amendment there about quartering of soldiers in your home. Number 15, the Bill of Rights Day dates back to 1941. You see a picture there of Roosevelt. On November 27th, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt urged America's citizenry to celebrate December 15th as Bill of Rights Day in honor of its anniversary. I call upon officials of the government and upon people of the United States to observe the day by displaying the flag of the United States on public buildings and by meeting together for such prayers and such ceremonies as may seem to them appropriate. It is especially fitting, he added, that this anniversary should be remembered and observed by those institutions of a democratic people which owe their very existence to the guarantees of the Bill of Rights. The free schools, the free churches, the labor unions, the religious and educational civic organizations of all kinds, which, without the guarantee of the Bill of Rights, could never have existed, which sicken and disappear whenever in any country these rights are curtailed or withdrawn. So you can see this is an incredibly strong statement by Roosevelt at the time as he announced Bill of Rights Day on December 15th, which is still celebrated today. Number 16, President George W. Bush reaffirmed the Bill of Rights in a 2003 speech. You can see a picture of Bush there on the top right, and then there's a picture in the middle there of the actual speech itself that he signed. During his presidency, George W. Bush gave commemorative remarks about the responsibility of the government to secure the rights of all and treat each person with equality. Furthermore, he stated that the true American Revolution was not to defy one earthly power, but to declare principles that stand above every earthly power. This reaffirmation of the principle that our individuals' rights were given by God and not by government was an important statement that had not been given in several generations. It's really important that we have these presidents through the ages who continue to reaffirm the importance of the Bill of Rights and how they really are the foundational block that we base this country on. Number 17, Madison drafted the original 19 amendments, which became 17 and then 12 and then 10 after approval by the states to become the Bill of Rights. Really important to think about James Madison being given this task after the Constitution had been approved, but before they had been ratified. And he had reached out to all the individuals who were thinking about whether to ratify these constitutional documents and promised them that he would draft these Bill of Rights and introduce it to Congress. So James Madison, who had already helped draft much of the original Constitution, took up the task of drafting a Bill of Rights over 2 months in New York City. Madison largely drew from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which was primarily written by George Mason in 1776. He also drew from amendments suggested by the states' ratifying conventions. Madison drafted 19 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which he proposed to Congress on June 8, 1789. The House of Representatives narrowed those down to 17. Then the Senate, with approval of the House, narrowed them down to 12. Those 12 being approved on September 25, 1789, and sent to their states for ratification, of which 10 were finally approved in 1791, a full 4 years after the Constitution was approved. Number 18, the Bill of Rights gets more important over time. The Bill of Rights represents the first step that we, the people, took in amending the Constitution in order to form a more perfect union. The original unamended Constitution was a remarkable achievement, establishing a revolutionary structure of government that put power in the hands of the people themselves. The Bill of Rights built on that foundation, protecting our most cherished American freedoms, including freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and due process of law. For more than 2 centuries, as we have exercised, restricted, expanded, tested, and debated these freedoms, the Bill of Rights has shaped and been shaped by what it means to be an American. You see a picture of the congressman debating on the bottom left there, the 19 amendments that came across, and then, of course, as you saw, approved 12 of those to go to the states. Number 19, the first draft of the First Amendment was more than twice as long as the final 45 words. The 5 freedoms of religion, speech, the press, assembly, and petition were each protected in the original draft of the First Amendment, but in a much wordier way than the final ratified version. The draft text first read, "The civil rights of none shall be abridged on account of religious belief or worship, nor shall any national religion be established, nor shall the full and equal rights of conscience be in any manner or any pretext infringed. The people shall not be deprived or abridged of their right to speak, to write, or to publish their sentiments. And the freedom of the press, as one of the great bulwarks of liberty, shall be inviolable. The people shall not be restrained from peaceably assembling and consulting for their common good, nor from applying to the legislature by petitions or remonstrances for redresses of their grievances." This draft, for example, provides more detail about freedom of speech described in the First Amendment, mentioning the right to speak, to write, or to publish. And you see a picture there on the bottom left and the center of the original Bill of Rights and the original First Amendment that was approved, that was much shorter than this one. Number 20, the Second Amendment was core to protecting all the other rights. You see a picture there on the top left of the Second Amendment itself, and then it's actually on several different statues, including the one there in the center. The Amendment 2 to the Constitution protects the right for citizens to possess weapons for the protection of themselves, their rights, their property, and to prevent government tyranny, providing a check on government overreach. The original text is written as such: "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The notion of average citizens possessing their own weapons predates the Constitution. In the English Bill of Rights in 1689, Parliament allowed all English citizens to have arms for their defense suitable to their conditions as allowed by law. The English described the possession of weapons as an auxiliary right to support the core rights of self-defense and resistance to oppression, as well as for the armed citizenry to protect their homeland. It's a really important concept here that was coming up from the English Bill of Rights in the 1600s into the original Second Amendment that we ended up putting into our Bill of Rights. And this is a really, really important concept to continue to arm the people against government tyranny and to give the people their freedom through their protection by arms. Number 21, the Fifth Amendment was debated widely by Congress and the states. Fifth Amendment in 1791 to the Constitution was part of the Bill of Rights that articulates procedural safeguards designed to protect the rights of criminally accused and to secure life, liberty, and property. The Fifth Amendment mentions property twice, once in Due Process Clause and again in the amendment's final clause, commonly known as the Takings Clause. The common denominator of property rights is the concept of fairness that applies to the authority of the federal government to acquire private property. You can see a copy there of the Fifth Amendment. Incredibly important, this concept of individual property, which many societies before America never had. This ability that people can keep their property and that the government does not have a right to take it. Number 22, Bill of Rights were intended to protect freedoms and eliminate politics from infringing on them. The very purpose of the Bill of Rights was to withdraw certain subjects from the aims of political controversy, to place them beyond the reach of majorities, and to establish them as legal principles to be applied by the courts. One's right to life, liberty, and property, to free speech, a free press, freedom of worship and assembly, and other fundamental rights may not be submitted to vote. They depend on the outcome of no elections. And that was a quote by Robert H. Jackson, who was a Supreme Court justice. See a great picture of him there on the right. And he's exactly right. And that's why we have the Bill of Rights in the first place, is to protect all of these rights and not subject them to the political winds of the day, and not subject them to a vote, but to solidify them and make them concrete in our foundation. Number 23, an 11-person select committee took up the Bill of Rights in Congress. When James Madison presented his proposal, many Federalists spoke against it, including Representative James Jackson of Georgia. He spoke against the hurry with respect to altering the Constitution. Jackson pointed out that the U.S. Constitution was a very new and untested document, describing it as a vessel just launched, and said Congress should set up her masts and expand her sails, and be guided by the experiment for her alterations. The House agreed to postpone the debate on Madison's proposal and took it up once again before the whole House on July 21st. However, several members still questioned the need for these amendments. In the end, the House elected an 11-person select committee. Who were these men? Representatives John Vining, James Madison, Abraham Baldwin, Roger Sherman, Edmund Burke, Nicholas Gilman, George Clymer, Edward Benson, Benjamin Goodhue, Elias Boudinot, and George Gale. The committee advanced 19 amendments written by Madison for the consideration by the full Congress. You see a great picture there of this 11-person committee that was debating this incredible activity they were doing, which was to bring these amendments to the floor. Number 24, George Washington made the Bill of Rights the focus of his first congressional speech as president. See a great picture there of George, our first president and founding father. George Washington made the Bill of Rights the subject of his first address to Congress, stating that public harmony could only be achieved by revering the characteristic rights of free men. In other words, a Bill of Rights that promoted rather than surrendered America's founding principles. The Bill of Rights protects Americans from the federal government, protections that few could conceive of living without: the freedom of religion, of speech, of the press, to peaceably assemble and to petition their own government. And that's just the First Amendment. Showing their humility and trust in the American people, the founders acknowledged that the original Constitution's imperfections could be remedied by these new amendments. It's really cool that George, who originally was against the Bill of Rights at the Constitutional Convention, just like Madison, he came around to the idea of the Bill of Rights and became a proponent of it and understood that the original Constitution was incomplete without it. Number 25, constitutional amendments are difficult to pass, and that's on purpose. An amendment may be proposed by 2/3 of each House of Congress or by a national convention called by Congress in response to requests by 2/3 of the state legislatures. It becomes part of the Constitution after being ratified either by the legislatures of 3/4 of the states or by conventions in 3/4 of the states. Congress decides which form of ratification should be used and how much time the states have to consider each amendment. The process of amending the Constitution was designed to be difficult, and this really is true. And you see the 27 amendments there on the left and a picture of them. And the whole concept of making sure amendments were difficult to pass was because you can imagine that once it gets on the books, it's incredibly hard to remove an amendment. And these are laws that were going to affect the entire country, every single state, every single citizen. So they need to be very carefully considered, carefully crafted, and then, of course, passed by a large proportion of the public. Famous quotes about the Bill of Rights. There's a good one here by Jefferson. A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government, and what no just government should refuse or wrest on inference. So a really great quote there. Another one here by A.E. Saman. The United States is the Bill of Rights. Compromise the Bill of Rights and you dissolve the very foundation upon which the Union stands. Nowhere in the Bill of Rights are the words "unless inconvenient" to be found. So it really is true that if you think about it, the Bill of Rights are only good if they always stand, and there's no inconvenience that can allow an exception. Another one here by Patrick Henry. Show me the age and country where the rights and liberties of the people were placed on the sole chance of their rulers being good men without a consequent loss of liberty. And that is really true. Because of human nature, we can't trust our rulers to allow us to have these rights. A lot of people allow power to corrupt them absolutely. And so it's very important to have it codified and have it solidified as law. Here's one by Harry S. Truman. I have little patience with people who take the Bill of Rights for granted. The Bill of Rights, contained in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, is every American's guarantee of freedom. Here's one by Hugo Black. The concept that the Bill of Rights and other constitutional protections against arbitrary government are inoperative when they become inconvenient or when expediency dictates otherwise in a very dangerous doctrine, and if allowed to flourish, would destroy the benefit of a written constitution and undermine the basis of our government. Again, very much true there, that you can't allow this chipping away at the Constitution or chipping away at the Bill of Rights to happen. It needs to be solidified, it needs to be concrete with no changes, unless you go through the amendment process, of course. Here's one by Noah Webster. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any bands of regular troops that can be on any pretense raised in the United States. Again, a really important concept around the Second Amendment is that a real check against the government in general, and we believe in checks and balances, but one of the biggest ones is that our citizenry is armed. You know, very similar over in Switzerland, it's the same way. When you have an armed citizenry, it prevents an unjust law to be enforced by the government. Another one here, the Bill of Rights wasn't enacted to give us any rights. It was enacted so the government could not take away from us any rights we already had. So that's that whole concept of inherent or inalienable rights that we have from our Creator. And the final one here, voters, whatever their political views, should rise up against politicians who want to dilute the Bill of Rights to perpetuate their tenure in office. So that's a really good one. Don't allow politics to creep into the foundations of our country, which are the Bill of Rights. So I hope you enjoyed that there and learned a lot about the Bill of Rights, the 25 interesting facts, the short video, and the lead-in of the actual Bill of Rights themselves. Hopefully you'll spend some time really digging into this topic. It's really, really important. Foundation of our country in general really is what our entire society rests upon and allows us to have the free republic that we have today. Has endured for 250 plus years, and hopefully it will endure for another 250 plus years after that, because it was so well crafted and so well passed at the time. Of course, as the society changes over time, there will be additional amendments, I'm sure, and that's good. That's how the system was set up, to allow those changes and allow things that happen in society to be incorporated into our founding documents. So hopefully you'll want to dig down this rabbit hole a little bit, learn a little bit more. Definitely check out our other episodes on the U.S. Constitution and on the Declaration of Independence, where we talk about the history of both of those. And hopefully you love history as much as we do, and I hope you have a great evening. Thanks so much.